the always contentious issue of school admissions, a suggestion that 1 in 4 baptisms to particular religious faiths are motivated solely by the desire of parents to have the child in that particular faith to get to a particular school in their local area. Now, as it happens, this is something that the Minister for Education and Skills, Richard Bruton, has been looking at, and indeed an Oireachtas subcommittee as well. And he made a speech on the issue today. Hello to you, Minister.
Hi, Matt.
Now, Minister, do you have a firm proposal as to how to deal with this particular issue, or are you just giving us a list of options to consider?
Well, I suppose the backdrop to this is I've set the ambition that I want Ireland to have the best education service in Europe. And I think one of the areas where we can undoubtedly improve is how we integrate parents who have different beliefs. And this has been a source of difficulty right across Europe, integrating faith and into the education system. So, I mean, I recognise that the desire to bring up your child in your own faith is something that's to be welcomed and valued. But Ireland has changed, and what I'm putting forward is options to consider how do we change that, but with a very tight time frame. The background again is, a parent who lives next door to a school might find that a child from 10 miles away is given preference because they're of the religious denomination, and that's unfair. And equally, as you say in your opening comment, it's unfair that parents should feel obliged to baptise their child simply to get access to a school. Now, we start from a situation where 96% of schools are denominational. So, this represents a challenge because now over a third of newly marrieds are marrying completely outside of denominational religion. So we have to start changing, and I've set out a number of options that can take us down that road of change.
What's your preference?
Well, I think the first thing is we need to have consultation on these. I've set out one can be a bit like the Labour Party's bill that's currently before the Dáil, having either a catchment so that religious preference can only be given within a very specific area, either a catchment or the closest to the school. Another approach would be a quota, or the third approach would be to ban religion as a criterion for entry entirely. Now, there's a lot of people who advocate for that last approach, but clearly one of the concerns that we need to hear about is how would this deal with minority churches, and you can very easily see how a church, say a Church of Ireland church, as we heard about this morning at the forum, whose catchment is very large. The only way it can retain a significant proportion of children of Church of Ireland ethos is by drawing children from a considerable distance. Their capacity to do that would be wiped out if religion wasn't allowed in their case, and this was raised as a concern. So I think we need to hear the views of different groups so that...
For sure, we've been hearing them for years. I mean, what we're looking for is action. As you mentioned yourself, this is something that one of your predecessors, Rory Quinn, was looking at. This has been talked about for years. Where do you stand on it? What do you want?
Well, I want to make decisions on this during the course of this year, and that's very clear. We have already got a bill that has passed second stage in the Dáil that will provide for a catchment approach, and that is being examined by the Oireachtas committee. And I think we have put a date at which that will be completed in June, and at that point we need to be in a position to make decisions about what we put in place. So I think it's very timely to hear how this will impact on groups who need to express their views so that they can be taken into account in this decision process. I mean, I'm only recently in the job, and I'm determined that we will change in this area, but I'm equally conscious that this is going to have an impact on thousands of people, and that there's genuinely strongly held views here.
Okay, but why not take religion out of the schools, in the sense that, for example, we have large Eastern European communities and Asian communities who bring their children here to Ireland, or their children are born in Ireland. They'd not facilitated in the curriculum in the Irish schools. So a lot of them have weekend schooling where they learn their native languages or they learn their cultural traditions. If people want to bring up their children in religious faith, should they not do so in denominational institutions at weekends outside of the normal school curriculum?
Well, I think there are different ways in which this can be approached. One thing we do know is that, with the resources available, we won't be able to meet every parent's desire to have their child in exactly the sort of designed environment that they might choose. And we're trying to accommodate people as best we can against a background where, 96% of primary schools are now denominational. Clearly, we need to accommodate children who aren't of that denomination better, and I've very clearly signalled that I want to change in that area too. And, the parents' charter will be one issue. Schools will have to specify in their admissions policy how they will deal with a child who is not of their denomination. So there's a number of changes we need to make. We're on a journey here. But
the specific point I made to you about taking religion out of schools and make it something that parents can opt to do with their religious faith at the weekend.
Well, I think you have to recognise that we're starting from a point where 96% of primary schools are run by patrons who are of a denomination. So we have a lot of schools who have developed. There's a lot of parents very happy with the education that they provide. They opt to have their children in that environment. However, we need to recognise that that's changing rapidly, and that we have to accommodate to new demands on the education system, and that's what I'm trying to provide a course to do that.
Minister for Education Richard Bruton, thank you for joining us.